from Selma town. Right, oh,
they are foot soldiers with footprints in American history, indelible and deep.
That's why we're moving in a creep. Right. We made some...
You know most of their names and faces, the men who marched in the civil rights movement alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Jesse Jackson, Ralph Abernathy, Hosea Williams. There were others, mostly in the shadows, sometimes literally in the driver's seat.
I'm Tom Houck, and I was Martin Luther King Jr.'s driver.
You probably do not recognize him, but part of his story will sound familiar.
Tom Houck was handpicked by Mrs. Coretta Scott King to be Dr. King's chauffeur and the family's driver.
She asked me if I had my driver's license.
The 18-year-old moved to Atlanta for a job with SCLC.
I had to involve myself, even if it meant death.
His work for equality expands all races. Tom Houck was a foot soldier for freedom.
It's time once again for another edition of Talk to Me. And now, here's ME himself, 8-time Emmy Award-winning journalist, Maynard Eaton.
Hello again, my friends, and welcome to this week's edition of Talk to Me, our weekly conversation with political, cultural, and this week we have a major influencer with regard to civil rights and journalism. His name is Tom Houck. Tom, thanks for joining us. You've been in Atlanta, a legend for quite a while, sir.
Well, I came to Atlanta accidentally, really. I was working with Hosea Williams and SCLC over in Birmingham, and Dr. King had come over there to congratulate us on winning what he called Selma 2, because Birmingham, being what it was being recalcitrant, and we were trying to really get the federal registrars in Birmingham to register voters. So I came over here to Atlanta, working with Hosea Williams. I might add the great Hosea Williams, and for those,
yes,
and we're going to be talking about my buddy John Lewis, and John's one of my best friends in the whole world. But Hosea needs to get a little bit of credit for walking across that bridge with John.
That's right.
I'll be honest with you. But so I came over to Atlanta and wound up driving with Dr. King.
Yes.
Accidentally. I was waiting outside of the SCLC office on Auburn Avenue. For those in Atlanta, they know exactly where that's going to be, where that is. National Park Service owns part of the building now, and they're redoing it. Right. It's also where the Masonic Temple is, and several other things. WERD, one of the first black radio stations in Atlanta, or the first. But anyway,
and the country.
Yes, right. And Dr. King took me with Coretta and the kids over to their house for Sunday lunch. Here I hardly knew Dr. King. I was coming over to Atlanta, actually, to help answer mail and work with Jose and live in the Freedom House. The old Freedom House in Atlanta used to be on Johnson Avenue, which is now the John Lewis Freedom Parkway. But at any rate, so that's how I got here. I've been arrested about 18, 19 times in civil rights movement. I knew John Lewis a long time before that. But before we get to John Lewis, I got to ask you something. Now, come on now. Back then in the 60s, I imagine, the early 70s, a young white 60s. Kid. We're talking the 60s. Yeah. So it had to be a little different. A teenager, basically, white guy driving Dr. King. We talk about race today. That had to be the opposite back then for you. Well, the brothers were giving trouble. I mean, they were gentle on me, but white folks and the cops were even worse. So I had it from both directions. I mean, particularly when a white guy went to work directly for Dr. King, it was not easy. But John Lewis, and let's talk about John. But John and I became friends in Atlanta, and we became friends through Julian Bond. Julian Bond and I, Julian was the journalist for SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He was the press director. He really worked with the networks that were here and so forth. But he introduced me to John. Really got me. I knew John, but I didn't really know him. So John and Julian and I would go out and have a drink. Those were the days when John was drinking. He stopped drinking after he got married to the lovely and Lillian Mile Lewis. So John and I and Julian were all very good friends. And you know, it was really interesting because people in SCLC weren't necessarily a lot of friends with SNCC. So I was friends with all these SNCC people. So John and I became confidants. We started talking on the telephone every day and gossiped. John loved to gossip. You know, I mean, if he saw you when he thought something, he'd say he gossiped about it. And then most people don't know the human side to Mr. Lewis. You know, Lillian Lewis is
just before he got elected to the Atlanta City Council, just before he even became an elected official, right?
Oh yeah, I knew him way before that. And I knew him in the '60s. John didn't run for the council until the '70s, and he won. He won the council. That was his first elected position.
Yeah, that's when I met him.
Then he went on to run and destroy a friendship for all of us with Julian Bond. But they did make up. I stayed pretty friendly with Julian. Everybody
after their battle for the U.S. House of Representatives, there was a battle. They became friends again. You're saying?
At the very end of John's life, it took a long time. Lily and John's wife never made up with Alice, and they would go out on date nights and dinners, and they were very, very close.
That was real bitter. That was a bitter.
But people in Atlanta don't know this, and of course these names are known around the world as well. But Coretta Scott King campaigned for Julian Bond. Martin Luther King Jr. No, I'm serious. Had passed, but Coretta campaigned. Maynard Jackson campaigned.
Yes, I was there.
For Julian Bond. Julian Bond won the black vote. And John Lewis won the white vote. And that's how John Lewis was elected to Congress. Everybody thought that Julian was going to be a shoo-in. Sophisticated man running in Atlanta, and so forth. But
Julian thought he was going to be a shoo-in too. Julian thought he was going to win without any problems also.
Oh no, he thought that was going to be a piece of cake.
Right.
We all did. All of us in Atlanta thought that. I was doing a radio talk show then, so I didn't have to really take a position for John or Julian. I think that both of them know who I was for, but they didn't take a position. But John and I continued to talk. I went up to Washington when he first opened his office, and we talked about what he was going to do. I want to say something, man. From 1965 until John passed away a year ago today, which is July 17th, we probably talked every single day of the week for most weeks.
Really?
Every single day.
I didn't know you were that close. I know you were friends. Right. I didn't know you were that close.
They were that close. When he was, when he was going to a hotel, he would call me. It was kind of room service he was getting. Michael, his chief of staff, was with him. Or when he went to Oprah's house, he would tell me what it was like to go to Oprah's house. Constantly.
Well, that's how you got the news so much. That's how you got the news on your talk show. You had a source in D.C.
Oh, he was a great source. As Lillian Lewis used to say about the two of us, we were like leaky refrigerators. But at any rate, so it was a real love and a passion for us. We talked all the time. We fought every now and again, and then we watched things together. In the last year of John's life, this is going to be interesting to a lot of people out there. He liked Brian Williams on MSNBC.
Okay.
And we would watch every night, even when he was real sick, Brian Williams on MSNBC. And even if John was in the bed, we would talk about what they were talking about. But we would talk about the news, and we would talk about political figures, and we would talk about how we saw John, I would just say, John had very, very few close friends. He had half a dozen or so very close friends, but very few.
And you were among them, obviously.
I was obviously one of them, and it was speaking to him. It was like speaking to a brother. He was more than a brother. I never had a brother, he was. There wasn't anything that was off limits in our discussion.
how do you feel today, the 1-year anniversary of his death? I mean, I'm sure you grieved for quite a while, and it's something of an honor, I would imagine. Today, you're honoring him with this tour, your civil rights tour that you've been doing since 2015. But today is in his honor.
Not just me, but the Congress and the president. Well, the president's not going, but the Speaker of the House is going to San Diego to christen a naval boat for John, for like we call it the Peace Force, and in Nashville, Tennessee, of all places. But that was really where John started in the civil rights movement, was Nashville. They're having a street change name, calling it John Lewis Way, right in front of the Grand Ole Opry. That's today. And there are probably 100 different kinds of things happening on this day across the country. High schools named for John, junior high schools named for John, programs are named for John, scholarship programs named for John. I mean, so many things are going on. Mr. Lewis, of course, if he was alive today, okay, you know what he would be doing? He's making sure that John Lewis voting rights.
That's what I want to talk to you about. Has he grown? Has his legacy grown more in depth because the John Lewis Voting Rights Act has been talked about every day this past week, and also the other honors you talk about? Has John Lewis grown in terms of his stature and his impact and importance since his untimely death?
Are you serious? Are you serious? Of course he has. I mean, John Lewis is known all over the world now. They're making movies about John Lewis. They're making TV shows about John Lewis, animated cartoons about John Lewis, cartoon books about John Lewis. He is now probably, well, he will be forever. But I would say the civil rights leaders is revered, not quite as revered as Dr. King, because he was, different ever. But I would tell you this: in many, many ways, John Lewis today is his voice and his words and his books. He has several books, and one that's just coming out. But those books now will be read. People will listen to John Lewis. His ideology of nonviolence will be thoroughly discussed, and he will be besides just being a civil rights leader, a congressman. He is now a scholar. Well, I want to say something. John came back home from D.C. about 3 weeks prior to his finding out that there was going to be little or no success for his survival. And the doctors basically said, go home. And he came back to Atlanta. But before he came back to Atlanta, he said, Tom, you watch tomorrow. You're going to see me. I said, what do you mean? Mayor Bowser had called me and asked me if I wanted to come down to the Black Lives Matter mural in front of the White House, Lafayette Park particularly. And he said, I'm going down. They come and pick me up in the morning. And he said to me at that point, when he went down to the mural and had a view up here, down across the mural, and then went down on the street, how moving it was, and what a social movement John died in the middle of the social movement. I mean, right. of not only just Black Lives Matter, right after after Floyd, John took a strong position on not only police brutality, but was trying to get young people involved in the movement, which he did. But when he went to see the Black Lives mural painted on the street in front of the White House, he said, he's calling Mr. Houck. Mr. Houck, he said, I can go back to Atlanta. He knew that time was coming to a close.
Well, that was going to be his epitaph. That was his epitaph, though. That Black Lives Matter painting, right?
Right. That was one of the last major things that you saw John do, and he did that purposely. He wanted to do that. He wanted to see that. I mean, when he came back to Atlanta, he was at home, and he had care, and probably 20 friends came over during the time. Not many people. John has 8 sisters and brothers. Many of them came over. Son was here, John Miles, and his chief of staff, but very few of us were at the home. Jan Moore and several. But by and large, John was a very private man for such a public figure.
Yeah. So what will your tour today tell us about John Lewis that perhaps others don't know or didn't know? And what will it show?
Well, one of the first things we're going to see, many of us know, which has become since John's death a very prominent place in Atlanta, the mural on Sweet Auburn Avenue. You know who donated the money for that mural? Jack Bond, Valerie Jackson, and Halpert paid the money for that mural. People in Atlanta will know who they are, but Valerie Jackson's the widow of Maynard Jackson.
Right.
We're also going to go up by the new Cook Peace Park in Vine City and take a look at the new sculpture of John Lewis that has been put in Cook Park, the first one, and talk a little bit about the history of John with Vine City. And then we're going to go from there to see John's old house in Cascade Heights, and go from there to Southview Cemetery, to where both his wife Lillian and he are buried. And we'll have to say a few words in commemoration to John. I think it'll be a very moving day.
But knowing you as well and having taken the tour, as much as the sights, it's going to be your sounds, your commentary, you're as much of the tour as what people see. Is that correct?
Well, I don't want to be boring. I
don't think you've ever been accused of that, Tom.
I don't want to put people to sleep, maybe. I want to, give as much as I can in the highlights of what I see. And I, as much as it is in a struggle and how much important civil rights is and how the new battles of the future will be, I have a little levity. That sometimes some people might get mad at me for, being too humorous on a serious venture. But I think that helps in some ways to bring people together. I have someone asked me the other day, how long have you been in the civil rights movement? I went really all my life, but I got involved with it when I was 8 years old. So a white boy, that ain't bad.
Well, Tom, you're also one of the leading radio journalists.
Huh?
You're also one of the leading radio journalists talking about the civil rights movement for decades as well.
Oh, yeah. I could do that as well. I did that for 10 years and did a TV show called The Georgia Gang until they kicked me off.
I got kicked off too, so don't feel bad about
it. But I've known you for many years.
Say again?
I said I've known you for many, many years as well. But by the way, I want to say this about John. John did do political endorsements. Not a lot, but some. But and I know this because I've talked to John Ossoff about this, but Senator Ossoff in primary was known as John Lewis Ossoff. John had done so many campaign commercials for John in the primary that they connected. I think that John Lewis, prior to John Ossoff's victory in January, that it was a major victory for John early on. He really wanted John Ossoff in the Senate. And of course, his pastor, Reverend Warnock, is also in the Senate. So I think he's delighted by both of those things. People say to me, who would John really have liked to be the 5th District Congressperson? Would it really be Nikema Williams? And I say what John and I talked about. He didn't have a choice. He never thought he was going to, he never thought that he was going to die.
I got you.
And, he was going to go down with his boots on, which he did. But he never really said to me, Tom, I want Nikema Williams, or I want Lawrence Hall, or I want, Christine Reed. He didn't say any of that. He didn't tell me that who he really supported.
Who did you really support? Who did you really support?
I pretty much felt like him. I actually supported Kwanzaa for the 30-day. And of course, he's running around the country now telling people he's a congressman, which he was for 30 days. And, and I've known Kwanzaa since he was born. I was in the hospital. That was Leon Hall, who worked with us, and SCLC's son. And so I've known Kwanzaa all my life. I like Dr. Franklin too, by the way. I mean, that was I had no choice. I mean, Kwanzaa, I've known him all his life.
Finally, Tom, your civil rights tour again you've been doing it since 2015. Is this your highest achievement? Again, you've been a civil rights activist. You've been a radio journalist.
I like to bring my knowledge of Atlanta and its civil rights. And, I mean, I take it on my tour now. I do two things that I haven't prominently done in the past. Well, one just happened last year. I go by the Wendy's there on University Avenue and talk about the horrible shooting of Rashad Brooks,
right?
And what happened during that period. So I stopped there. I mean, and I stopped and talked to them a little bit about the insurrection in Atlanta. We talked so much about Tulsa. Atlanta had a major insurrection in this town in 1906. More than 10,000 white people came down Edgewood Avenue, came down Decatur Street. A lot of shops and bars and restaurants were loaded on those two streets, and basically torched them. And there were, dozens of deaths, and black and white deaths. And it was really two Atlanta newspapers, and not the Journal Constitution, but the News and the Atlanta Herald back in those days were two newspapers that said, white men have been raping black women on Decatur Street at these honky tonks. And it brought out all this anti-vicious racial Klan behavior that came into Edgewood Avenue. A lot of black folks started to move from around Auburn Avenue and the old Fourth Ward out to the west side and to the south of Atlanta at this point after this race insurrection, I call it. And it changed Auburn Avenue to a great degree. It brought a few black businesses back to Auburn Avenue, but Atlanta used to have black businesses actually on Peachtree Street. After Reconstruction and up to the 1906 race riot, Alonzo Herndon, who was a barber, had 19 barbers. Only had white clientele. Created the Atlanta Life Insurance Company. He was not on Auburn Avenue. He came down to Auburn Avenue. I think W.E.B. Du Bois put up his butt. But it was a time for recognizing, for a lot of black bourgeoisie in Atlanta that there's still a lot of white hate out here. I mean, and it still is today. But a lot of Auburn Avenue became really the jewel after the 1906 race riot.
Tom, I'm sitting here in Indiana. Yes, I heard you. Does this really matter, you think, to my producers in Philadelphia? Does your tour, Atlanta's racial history, you think it matters? It resonates around the country?
Absolutely. Atlanta, to both whites and particularly to black folk, Atlanta is the Mecca of civil rights. It is the place of 5 great universities. It is a place where 3rd or 4th highest incomes for African Americans in America. And they want to come to Atlanta. They want to see these places. They want to go and know a little bit of that history, why Atlanta became Atlanta and why it didn't become Birmingham. They want to know that. So yeah, my tours are significant, are important, and I would like to tell all of your viewers out there to definitely put it on their agenda to come. Look it up, get a ticket at civilrightstour.com or call 404-386-0992.
Tom Houck, you're truly significant too, man. It's been nice. You have no idea. Knowing you has been standing next to history in Atlanta. And we thank you for joining us on this, on your tribute to Representative John Lewis. You're a good friend.
A day that many of us are very reflective of that day. I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna try to sugarcoat it. I'm gonna be feeling some pain and anguish that my pal ain't here.
Ladies and gentlemen, Tom Houck, Maynard Eaton here. This has been Talk to Me. We'll see you next week.